Okay, this morning's subject will revolve around scarcity, not enough. And I'm going to use some biblical stories to point that out, make a valid point of it, but I think it is already quite valid that many of us deal with scarcity, the not enough attitude. There's not enough of me, not enough of my skill, not enough of finances, and not enough, not enough, not enough. In every direction that we look, there can be this not enough attitude. But if I was to ask these people, do you believe we serve a God with more than enough? I think every person would say, yes, that's the truth. And so I want to really, help us understand that the not enough attitude is simply a mirage of a valley that really doesn't exist, but it looks like it. And so I'm going to use a story of I think it was the days of Elijah, in the lady that had lost her husband, and then she found herself in debt, and the man that she owed to was about to take her 2 sons as a way of paying off the debt. And when we don't have enough, when things seem to come down to the bottom and there's very little left over, we find ourselves in a time of where we can only see what we don't have. When we allow that spirit of not enough to affect us, all that we can see is not enough. Is well, and that's all she could see. When she spoke with the prophet asked, well, what do you have? She says, I have nothing. Well, except a container of a very small amount of olive oil, the only thing she had. But in her mind, the first thing that came out of her mouth was she had nothing. She had that not enough disease, so to speak, and the enemy is the author of that disease. And so anyway, with that, let's be clear. She was also in fear. Right now, many of us are in famine, but not necessarily financial famine or food famine or place to live famine, but rather a famine maybe is spiritual or belief in oneself. Those things. And it could be also financial for some, in some sort of famine. But, if we're willing to work hard and stay the course and learn how to expand on our gifts and skills, we can change that financial famine. However, just the attitude of famine, the attitude of not enough, that's more dangerous than not having any finances or not having enough food or whatever the list goes on, because that can be replaced. But the not enough attitude, when a person has that disease, that is devastating because it hits every area of life. Finally, it gets to where I don't even have anything to offer. Who am I? Why am I even here? Nobody likes me. The list goes on. You guys know that story. Some of you guys have talked that story in the last 24 hours. The not enough attitude is a plague. It's a devastating mental cancer. But there is an antidote for it. There is a cure for it. However, it's not something that I can just say, hey, dude, these 3 things and boom, it's gone. Not quite the case, but there is a cure for it. And the cure looks more like recognizing when one has it. So I'm going to jump to a different story. We will come back to the lady that had, we'll just continue. That when the prophet tells her to go get barrels and to pour that olive oil, you can imagine she thought, this guy crazy, but he's a prophet. Okay, I'll do that. So she got enough barrels. And think of this. She went out and borrowed some from neighbors, only basically to the extent of what little faith she still had left. And when she began to pour, surprising, the oil continued until all of those barrels were filled. Oh, wow, this is cool. I wish I'd have got 4 times as many. Anyway, he asked her to do it again. This time she goes to a lot more people. But again, I can imagine she was thinking, oh, man, this is a large group of barrels. It has to run out sometime. You see, our finite mind can only see an end of something. We are taught every person must die. There's an end. But there's a deeper sense to God that is hard for humans to understand, and there is no end, no beginning and no end. There's more than enough. But the reason I'm bringing this up is the mindset of scarcity is so powerful. It can keep people in bondage, both spiritually, physically, mentally, in many areas. It can keep people in bondage. So let's take a look at another story, the time of Gideon. When at that time they were oppressed, they were under bondage, and the people that were ruling over them were wicked and mean and evil and tax them, way so much they just could barely survive. And so Gideon came from a very, very poor family, and they had some grain. And so he hid it and was thrashing it on the floor, on the ground. But they had to hide it in order so that the enemy wouldn't come and steal what little they had. They had to have something to survive on. So he had it in a hidden place, and he was thrashing it. And then this angel shows up. You can imagine Gideon the only thing he could see is what he didn't have, and what little he had, he hid. He was very focused on what he did not have. But see, within all of us, we have a little bit of oil and a little bit of grain, and it can be at many levels. But let's just take a look at what the angel said to Gideon. He begins to talk to him, and he calls him a man of valor. If you research the meaning of valor, that meant wealth, both finances and influence. That's why Gideon immediately responds. He understood the word and the term well, and he goes to this angel, not knowing it was an angel, and he said, "You're crazy." Basically, I don't think he used the word crazy, but I'm sure he thought it. "You're crazy. My father is of the poorest of the tribes, and I'm the least of them." He was really in the depths of not enough. But the angel didn't give up on him being a man of valor. All he had to do was sell him on it, get him to believe it. So you know the story. They go through this thing where Gideon says, "Okay, we'll lay this blanket down tomorrow morning. If the blanket is wet and the soil is dry, I'll believe you." Did he? No, he didn't. He had just as much unbelief as most of us do. And then he says, he flips it around. The story goes on. Anyway, at one point he believes it. He takes off. But his test wasn't over. When he gets his army of 32,000 men, God finds a way to dwindle that army down to 300 and some, so that God could prove it was him. What I'm here to tell you this morning, if you're dealing with the scarcity mindset and all the things that are going on in the world today, the devastation, the killing, I'm reminded of just recently the young Ukrainian girl stabbed to death, very graphic, raw footage of it floating around on the internet where people can look it up, and it's disgusting. I did not look it up, and I would not encourage you to do that either. But I have very credible sources of sharing with me that it is real and that it's out there. Okay. There's been horrific things going on recently, and so we might say there's a scarcity of the Spirit of God. I don't think there is. The Spirit of God is probably stronger now than ever, but there's a bigger division. The division is becoming larger between the Spirit-filled and those that may not be, or certainly not Spirit-filled of the right spirit. They are Spirit-filled, but of the wrong spirit, and that's what gets them to do those things. So with that being said, I'm going to challenge you to realize that even if you have a very, 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 very small morsel of oil, you have enough for it to expand, to fill more barrels than you can possibly imagine that you can get. You have this little gift of communication. Go ahead and use it. Pour it out on people. It may be enough to fill more barrels than you've ever dreamed that you could possibly fill. You may think you're weak, small, insignificant, can't really speak, shy, bashful. You don't have what it takes to talk to people or to do business. I'm going to tell you, you're a man or woman of valor, but you just must understand it. And once you understand it, you'll live up to it. Once you live up to it, everything around you will start to respond in accordance to your belief system. You see, as long as you allow the enemy to trick you into believing that there is nothing there, then he already owns your future. You see, that's where fear comes from. Fear is this thing that we don't have, like the lady when she first realized her husband had died and she was getting threats of them taking her sons, and she had not enough and she had extreme fear. Let me be very clear. Fear doesn't only exaggerate, it also lies. It doesn't only embellish things that are going on, it lies about it too. So when fear gets its way in your heart, in your mind, it has devastating news for you. Everything's about to crash down together. Everything's going to fall apart. Everything's not going to work out. Everything's going to be, and then is when you must stand up and say, but I do have a small morsel of oil. I am a man or lady of valor. I have what it takes. Within me, what's in me is greater than he that's in the world. And at that point, you'll start this feeling the surge of this greater power that can help you step up to who you are, who you were called to be, and what God created you to be. You realize that you don't need an army of 32,000. You need a small army that's sold out to the Word of God, and there you can go change whatever you want to change, your finances, your teams, your business, whatever. But you must first be sold out. Thank you, guys. Make it a great day. Do me a favor. As always, remember, don't settle for less than who you are. May God bless you.